vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 21st, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under Business and Finance are: Apple said that John Turnus, an affable mechanical engineer and 25-year veteran of the company's hardware division, will be its next chief executive, succeeding Tim Cook. Trump nominee to chair the Fed Kevin Warsh, embarked on a high-wire act to persuade investors of his independence while satisfying Trump's insistence on loyalty and adherence to his own policy views. Senate Democrats plan to tell the nominee his financial disclosures don't reveal to the public whether his investments include banks the Fed regulates. U.S. stocks slipped with the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow shedding 0.2%, 0.3%, and less than 0.1% respectively, and oil prices rose amid ongoing strain between the U.S. and Iran. Democratic and Republican senators raised concerns that a merger between United Airlines and American could harm travelers through higher fares and fewer flights. Spirit Airlines is in talks with the Trump administration about public aid, including a potential U.S. government investment in the company. Amazon said it would invest an additional $5 billion in Anthropic as the companies undertake to collaborate more closely. Adobe released AI agents that aim to help corporate customers automate digital marketing and other functions. Sela Realty Trust said it would be acquired by affiliates of Blue Owl Capital in an all-cash transaction valued at about $2.4 billion. USA Rare Earth agreed to acquire Serra Verde, the owner of a rare earth mine and processing plant in Brazil, in a deal valued at about $2.8 billion. Brady agreed to acquire Honeywell's productivity solutions and services business for $1.4 billion in cash. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Iran told regional mediators that it would send a negotiating team to Pakistan for the second round of peace talks with the U.S. as the end of a 2-week ceasefire looms. The Iranian cargo ship seized by U.S. forces in the Gulf of Oman is part of a fleet that often sails to China, one of Tehran's most important backers. The Justice Department's Antitrust Division is investigating whether large meat packers that supply the U.S. market engaged in criminal, anti-competitive conduct. The Justice Department sued Washington, D.C.'s water utility over a massive sewage spill in January that sparked a political fight between federal and state authorities. FBI Director Kash Patel sued The Atlantic, alleging that an article about his drinking and overall conduct was malicious and factually inaccurate. Billionaire philanthropist Connie Ballmer gave $80 million to NPR, which said it would use the funds to accelerate its digital transformation. UK Prime Minister Starmer said he unintentionally misled lawmakers when he claimed that Peter Mandelson had the requisite security clearance to be ambassador to the U.S. More than 60 nations sent representatives to Brussels for talks with Palestinian representatives on stability, security, and long-term peace. A gunman opened fire at the Teotihuacan pyramids north of Mexico, killing one Canadian tourist and injuring 6 others. A 7.7 magnitude earthquake off northern Japan prompted a short-lived tsunami alert and an advisory about a possible follow-on quake. The picture on today's front page shows a large city streets with a massive number of runners and spectators on the sidewalks cheering them along. And that headline is Tailwind Lifts Spirits, Helps Set Boston Record. The caption, Big Steps. More than 30,000 runners strode down Boylston Street toward the finish line Monday at the Boston Marathon. Men's defending champion John Courier broke the course record, riding a tailwind to win in 2 hours, 1 minute, 52 seconds. The article from U.S. Watch. 3 runners beat marathon record. Defending champion John Courier shattered the Boston Marathon course record Monday, riding a tailwind to outrun the strongest field in race history and win in 2 hours, 1 minute, 52 seconds, the 5th fastest marathon of all time. Sharon Lokedi joined her fellow Kenyan as a back-to-back champion, winning the women's race in 2 hours, 18 minutes, 51 seconds. Zahir Talbi and Jess McLean ran the fastest times yet for Americans in the men's and women's races, respectively. Alphonse Felix Simbu of Tanzania, 55 seconds back, and the 2021 champion Benson Kipruto, another 3 seconds behind him, also were fast enough to better the previous Boston record. Kelvin Kiptum holds the marathon world record with a 2 hours, 35 seconds on the flatter Chicago course in 2023. The main headline today, Cook to step down at Apple. CEO to move up to executive chairman in September. Hand the reins to insider Turnus by Ralph Winkler. Tim Cook, the longtime leader of Apple, is stepping down after transforming the iPhone maker into a titan of the technology industry, handing the reins to a veteran engineer. The company said Monday that John Turnus will take over as CEO, elevating an affable mechanical engineer and 25-year veteran of the company's hardware division. Turnus, 50 years old, takes the lead of Apple as it works to rekindle its creative fire and chart a hardware heavy future in the AI era. He follows Steve Jobs, who led the invention of the most popular consumer product in history, and Cook, who squeezed so much profit from the device that Apple became the world's most valuable company. His appointment will take effect September 1st when Cook will become executive chairman, succeeding longtime chair Art Livingston. Cook, 65, will be remembered for creating immense value. During his tenure, Apple's market capitalization grew by nearly $3.7 trillion to about $4 trillion, surpassing the value created by any other American CEO in total dollars, save NVIDIA's Jensen Huang. Known for deft politicking inside the company, Turnus had been widely seen as the leading candidate to succeed Cook. As a top hardware executive, he worked on the iPad, then later the Mac and AirPods, before taking over responsibility for all of Apple's products, including its most important, the iPhone. John is a deep collaborator, said Chris Deaver, a former Apple Human Resources staffer who worked with him. Having a great product leader at the helm right now is a good future indicator for Apple. A key question for Turnus is how he can help Apple maintain its dominance at a time when most of its rivals are investing hundreds of billions of dollars into computing infrastructure and embedding cutting-edge artificial intelligence tools into their products and daily workflows. Recent company moves have offered a hint at its strategy. Turnus has little experience with AI, and the company has fallen behind rivals in developing and releasing frontier models. It is not out of the race entirely, however, as iPhones are still a primary way consumers access AI apps. The company's App Store AI revenue is set to top $1 billion this year, simply by collecting subscription fees from companies such as OpenAI. Analysts see that role expanding as Apple prepares to release an overhauled version of its Siri Assistant later this year. Warsh embarks on tricky path for Fed job. Challenge is how we can manage what Trump expects with what he can deliver. By Nick Timiraeus. Wall Street and Washington will be watching Kevin Warsh on Tuesday for any sign he has an understanding with President Trump to cut interest rates if installed as chair of the Federal Reserve. Trump will be watching for any sign he doesn't. The High Wire Act starts before Warsh even has the job. Warsh secured the nomination by convincing Trump he shares the president's view that the Fed should be cutting rates. At his Senate confirmation hearing, he can reaffirm that case at a moment when the Iran war has turned economic conditions against it, or begin carefully to distance himself from it. Air cover from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who last week said he understood why the war had made the Fed hesitant to cut, might have helped Warsh. But Trump publicly overruled Bessent one day later, saying he didn't agree. Warsh has said almost nothing in public about monetary policy in 5 months, since before he was selected for the job. He broke the silence Monday, saying in prepared remarks for his hearing that the Fed's independence isn't threatened when elected officials state their views on interest rates. But he also warned that continued inflation would raise public doubts about whether monetary policy independence is worth preserving. The world has changed since the president and Kevin and any other Fed candidate may have talked, said Glenn Hubbard, the Republican economist who served with Warsh under President George W. Bush. Bringing colleagues along is Warsh's job, he said, and it's hard to believe that consensus would be around an immediate rate cut, just given the state of the world. Jerome Powell, the outgoing chair, approached Trump's pressure for lower rates through a posture of stoic non-engagement. The circumstances were also different when Trump picked Powell 8 years ago. In the run-up to Powell's confirmation, there was no publicly stated expectation by Trump that Powell was going to deliver a particular course of monetary policy. By contrast, Warsh's path to the job ran through a series of conversations in which Trump, a Republican, repeatedly indicated that whomever he chose would deliver what Powell hadn't. And Warsh didn't just inherit the expectations Trump now holds, he helped set them. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Owners allege Tesla misled on self-driving by Becky Peterson. When Tom LaSalvio bought his Tesla Model S in 2017, he thought he was buying a car that would one day drive itself. The retired attorney and self-described early adopter paid more than $100,000 for the luxury sedan, including $8,000 for lifetime access to its most advanced driver assistance features. Tesla chief executive Elon Musk said the hardware in the company's cars would eventually allow all of its cars to drive themselves. My wife and I talked about what a great thing it would be if we could just get in a car and have it drive us places, LaSalvio told the Wall Street Journal. In the 9 years since, LaSalvio said it has become clear Tesla took him for a ride. He is the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit that alleges that Tesla charged customers thousands of dollars in pricey upgrades for a product that didn't and still doesn't exist. LaSalvio alleges Musk and Tesla have made repeated claims that were false about the self-driving capabilities of these vehicles and misled consumers who paid extra because they believed the company's marketing. His lawsuit is one of several ongoing efforts by Tesla owners looking to hold the company accountable for over-promising and under-delivering on its full self-driving supervised product. How cybercrime made Cambodia. Gangs in Cambodia corrupted officials, enslaved workers, and fleeced victims. By Gabrielle Stenhauser and Patricia Kausman. Phnom Penh, Cambodia. A gold-hued skyscraper is rising above the traffic-clogged streets of the capital city. The building is already Cambodia's tallest structure and a monument to the spoils generated by transnational cyber gangs that have stolen billions of dollars from unsuspecting Americans and others worldwide. The skyscraper is being built by a company under sanctions by the U.S. Treasury Department for its alleged connection to one of hundreds of scam operations that have cropped up across Cambodia. Scam compounds, some the size of small towns, have housed enslaved workers doing the grunt work of online scams, posing as love interest, investors, or police. Predominantly Chinese syndicates in Cambodia have grown so enormous in scale that some foreign politicians refer to the country of 18 million people as Scambodia. The Treasury Department said in September that the company building the Phnom Penh skyscraper was owned by Xu Amin, a 64-year-old China-born convict and casino mogul who has shielded himself from law enforcement through his political connections. Xu is one of a half dozen alleged kingpins running cybercrime networks based in Cambodia who have been sanctioned by the U.S. or are wanted by investigative agencies in other countries. The list also includes 2 Cambodian senators and a Chinese advisor to successive Cambodian prime ministers. High Costs Drive Away Florida's Middle Class by Ariane Campo Flores and Paul Overberg. Orlando, Florida. Florida's migration patterns are changing dramatically. Residents in their prime working years are heading to other states, often citing affordability concerns. At the same time, the stream of people arriving from other states is shrinking. Meanwhile, an influx of wealthy people from other states, turbocharged during the pandemic, has helped drive up home prices. Inflation in parts of Florida outpaced the national average over the past decade, and home insurance rates soared. These side-by-side trends could spell trouble for a state whose economy relies on continued population growth and real estate development. The affordability picture has changed in Florida almost more than anywhere else in the country, said Eric Finnegan, Vice President of Demographics Research at John Burns Research and Consulting. Florida lost one driver of population growth when deaths began to outnumber births in the state in 2020. Large flows of immigration fueled gains for years, but have waned under the Trump administration's hardline policies. Despite the influx of wealth, net domestic migration, people arriving from other states minus those leaving to other states, has overall slowed to a trickle in the past few years. Stoking the change is a mismatch between the soaring cost of living in Florida and middling wages that haven't kept up. Now for other articles within the paper. Iran to attend Pakistan peace talks by Somerset, Natalie Andrews, and Dove Lieber. Iran told regional mediators that it would send a negotiating team to Pakistan on Tuesday for the second round of peace talks with the U.S., said people familiar with the matter, as the end of a 2-week ceasefire looms and as President Trump levied fresh threats on Iranian infrastructure. Tehran hadn't publicly confirmed it would send representatives to the meetings in Islamabad, and confusion about its participation in the talks grew after Iran's Foreign Ministry Representative Ismail Baqi said Monday that there was no plan for a second round of negotiations in the Pakistani capital. We don't believe in deadlines or ultimatums to secure Iran's national interest, he said. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said earlier that Tehran maintains a deep historical mistrust of the U.S. government, adding that Iranians do not submit to force. Trump is unlikely to extend the ceasefire with Iran that is set to expire on Wednesday evening, according to a White House official. The deadline puts pressure on negotiators ahead of the U.S.-Iran talks. Ship's fleet, often traded with China. Seized vessel, part of group controlled by Iranian company, sanctioned by U.S. By Austin Ramsey. The Iranian cargo ship seized by U.S. forces in the Gulf of Oman this past weekend is part of a fleet that often sails to China, one of Tehran's most important backers, and includes vessels that have been accused of transporting chemicals for Iran's ballistic missile program. The ship, the MV Tuska, visited the southern China port of Zhuhai twice in the 6 weeks before it was intercepted Sunday on its way to the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas, according to shipping analysts. The Tuska ignored 6 hours of warnings from the USS Spruance, a guided missile destroyer, according to the Pentagon. The warship then fired several rounds at the area of the ship's engine room, and Marines boarded the disabled vessel. The U.S. hasn't said what the Tuska was carrying. Searching through the containers on board will likely take time and needs to be done when the 965-foot ship is towed into a port. But the Tuska's decision to try to breach the U.S. blockade suggested it was carrying something of value to Iran, said Charlie Brown, a former U.S. Navy officer and senior advisor for the United Against Nuclear Iran, a U.S.-based advocacy group. Brown and a colleague flagged the Tuska last month as one of several Iranian ships that continued to operate despite the conflict, part of a larger fleet that evades U.S. or European Union sanctions to carry out trade between Iran and the outside world. The fleet includes tankers that transport oil to China. Others, such as the Tuska, are ships that carry a variety of cargo. From World Watch, European Union, Palestinian talks aim for more sway. More than 60 nations sent representatives to Brussels for talks Monday with Palestinian representatives on stability, security, and long-term peace. The European Union has largely been on the sidelines in the Middle East dispute, despite being the biggest provider of aid to the Palestinians and backing a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A majority of EU member countries recognize an independent Palestinian state. But the EU had no role in negotiating the October ceasefire in Gaza that took effect after 2 years of war. And European moves to condemn or sanction some Israeli actions frequently were vetoed by Viktor Orban. After the Brussels meeting, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said that without Orban's veto, action could be coming soon, such as imposing sanctions on violent Israeli settlers. Japan. Quake raises risk of stronger event. An earthquake registering a preliminary magnitude of 7.7 off northern Japan on Monday prompted a short-lived tsunami alert and the advisory of a higher risk of a possible mega quake for coastal areas there. The Cabinet Office and the Japan Meteorological Agency said there was a 1% chance for a mega quake compared with a 0.1% chance during normal times. In the next week or so following the powerful quake near the Kaikima and Japan trenches, officials said the advisory wasn't a quake prediction, but urged residents in 182 towns along the northeastern coast to raise their preparedness while continuing their daily lives. It was the second such advisory for the region in recent months. One was issued following a 7.5 magnitude quake in December, but no mega quake occurred. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages. In Iran, winning is the only thing. Trump's critics can't cheer for American victory because it brings him credit. By William McGurn. It comes down to victory in Iran. The Democrats don't matter, nor do the Republicans, or NATO, or other U.S. allies. Pope Leo XIV is at best a footnote. All that now matters for this president is that the U.S. prevails and the Islamic Republic ceases to be a menace to America and its interest. The president seems to get it. His legacy, it is now clear, will rest on whether his war against Iran succeeds or fails. And that success hinges on whether Iran remains a threat not only to Israel, but to our Sunni Arab friends who have their own reasons for wanting Iran defanged. If, however, depriving Iran of the means to threaten the U.S. and its friends in the region is the true measure of our success, we won't know for at least a decade whether we have succeeded. We Americans have short memories, as our enemies realize. At least since Vietnam, they have assumed we aren't in it for the long haul. They have more staying power than we do, they think, and Iran has more staying power than most, not least because it can count on proxies like Hezbollah. Iran's government, after all, has endured waves of devastating attacks by U.S. and Israeli military forces, but remains defiant. Even as President Trump threatens Iranian bridges and power plants, he constantly exhorts the Iranians to negotiate. The president sees himself as a deal maker above all else. That is why many who support his Iran policy still believe that he'll cut a deal, bring the troops home, and declare peace in our time. Maybe. Mr. Trump says many things, but not all of it is meant literally. In the movie Patton, a military aide to George C. Scott's Patton says, after the general's latest outburst, that sometimes the men don't know when he's acting and when he's not. It isn't important for them to know, Patton replies. It's only important for me to know. Mr. Trump is a bit like that. When his columnist was chief speechwriter for George W. Bush, Iraq was the focus of the war, but Iran was never far from our thoughts. Iran killed many U.S. troops in Iraq through its support of anti-American Shiite militias to which it provided improvised explosive devices. I remember as far back as 2007, sitting at my colleague's desk and debating which sentence was stronger. Iran will not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons, or Iran must not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. Today, that debate has been exhausted. All the talk, the headlines, the back and forth over the Strait of Hormuz, the complaints about Israel taking on Hezbollah, etc., have become background music. President Trump has put the mullahs on their heels. Now is the time to make sure the U.S. doesn't squander these gains and let the Iranians come back and do it all over again. This rankles American establishments. There is no one establishment anymore, of course, but there is a Republican establishment, a Democratic establishment, a mainstream media establishment, a Hollywood establishment, and so on. On Mr. Trump, they all agree. They can't stand him, and they want him to fail more than they want America to succeed. Look at poor Thomas Friedman. He was about as establishment as it gets, writing a foreign affairs column for the New York Times with 3 Pulitzer Prizes to his credit. And he hates Donald Trump. But give Mr. Friedman his due. One thing that sets him apart is that he's willing to speak openly about his bias and the untenable position it puts him in. During a recent appearance on CNN, he told host Michael Smerconish that he was torn because he really wants to see Iran defeated. Nothing would improve the region more, he said, than the replacement of this regime with a regime in Iran that was focused on enabling its people to realize their full potential and integrating peacefully with other countries and stop occupying Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. But here's the rub. The problem is I really don't want to see Bibi Netanyahu or Donald Trump politically strengthened by this war, because they are 2 awful human beings, he said. And there you have the twisted logic of the hate Trump chorus. Because they are more worried about Donald Trump getting credit for bringing down a murderous regime, they can't look forward to the liberation of millions of people. It's time for the Iran killing machine to end, Mr. Trump wrote on Truth Social on Sunday. He's right, and his administration will be judged by whether this is the real end or just a temporary interlude. The Iranians take Trump for a sucker. How many times do they expect him to play this game before they reopen the Strait of Hormuz? By Elliot Kaufman. How many times will President Trump pay Iran for the same real estate? Twice he has announced the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and twice he has given up U.S. leverage in exchange. Yet the strait remains closed as Iran regime demands more. On April 7th, Mr. Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire, subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. This implied that Iran hadn't quite agreed to it yet, and 2 sources familiar with negotiations told me gaps remained. But Iran's foreign minister eased concerns. For a period of 2 weeks, he wrote that evening, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be possible within certain limits. By the next morning, Mr. Trump was ebullient. A big day for world peace. Iran wants it to happen. They've had enough, he wrote. We'll be loading up with supplies of all kinds. When the journal's editorial board warned against declaring premature victory, the president was dismissive. Actually, it is a victory, and there's nothing premature about it, he wrote on April 9th. Very quickly, you'll see oil start flowing, he added. The Wall Street Journal will, as usual, live to eat their words. But the oil didn't flow. Tanker traffic declined even further. That is not the agreement we have, Mr. Trump would complain. This was Iran's first swindle. After the ceasefire, Iran's regime insisted on a new condition. Israel would have to stop attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon before negotiations could advance. This wasn't part of the deal, Mr. Trump replied. Hezbollah had started the war, and by smashing Iran's most important terror proxy, Israel was adding to the pressure on the regime, and thus to U.S. leverage. Then again, pausing would be seen as an Israeli concession, politically easier for the president. I spoke with Bibi Netanyahu, and he's going to low-key it, Mr. Trump said on April 9th. April 10th to 11th negotiations followed in Pakistan, and the U.S. walked away when Iran resisted key nuclear concessions. Mr. Trump now needed a new way to force the regime's hand. In the absence of military strikes, a blockade of Iran's ports would be America's stick. Its carrot would be an Israeli ceasefire in Lebanon. Direct Israel-Lebanon talks, previously scorned by Washington as pointless, given Beirut's inaction against Hezbollah, were arranged hastily for April 14th. The spectacle could distract some from the fait accompli. To soothe U.S. negotiations, Mr. Trump had dictated that Israel give Iran the reprieve it wanted in Lebanon. This second ceasefire was announced April 16th. Iran's foreign minister again acknowledged what had been agreed. In line with the ceasefire in Lebanon, he wrote on Friday, "The passage for all commercial vessels through Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open." A day after granting the concession, however, the regime withdrew it. This was the second swindle. On Saturday, Iran's military said the strait was closed. Approaching it will be considered cooperation with the enemy, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps warned. It even attacked a few vessels. The regime says it won't open Hormuz until the U.S. ceases blockading its ports. This will be Iranian's third swindle if Mr. Trump goes along. The regime wants the strait closed and U.S. leverage diminished for nuclear negotiations. They can't blackmail us, Mr. Trump said on Sunday, but they think they can. Certainly, they are comfortable embarrassing the president. What's stopping them from playing the same games over their stockpiles of enriched uranium? Mr. Trump first suspended attacks on Iran, then on Hezbollah. Iran now presses him to give up U.S. economic leverage too. Sometimes diplomacy can lock in military gains. This time, it has been set up to give them away. Mr. Kaufman is a member of the Journal's editorial board and co-author of In the War Room, the inside story of Israel's fight against Hamas and the Iranian Axis. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The Book of J.D., King James Version. Donald was appointed by God to lead the chosen people out of the slavery into which they had fallen. By James Baker. I think it's very, very important for people to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. Vice President J.D. Vance, April 14th. President Trump will participate in a marathon reading of the Bible on Tuesday, New York Times, April 18th. And it came to pass at that time that a man named Donald came forth from the land of Queens across the great East River from the city they called the New Jerusalem. Now this Trumpite was a master builder and a skilled storyteller, but he was not at first a man of God. He built vast temples to Mammon, some of which, heavily with debt, collapsed in a heap. He had lain with many women, numbering more than his wives. It was even said that he had kept company with a man from Sodom known as Epstein, the Onanite. But Donald was anointed by God to lead the chosen people out of the slavery into which they had fallen under the wicked rule of the House of the Democrats. They were led by a man named Obama. Obama was a false prophet. He came out of Africa and had spent years in the wilderness of the East and the West. He was silver-tongued and worshipped by the scribes, who falsely proclaimed him the Messiah. But he visited many torments on the people, affordable care, emissions rules, and restrictions on their lending practices. God's wrath was upon him. So when the Obamaites anointed the wife of a former prophet, the woman known as Hillary, as their next leader, the people rebelled. Though he faced a vast alliance of the elect, Donald smote Hillary and her cohorts in battle after battle, and with a single blast of his trumpet brought down the blue wall of the Middle West, their great fortress. For 4 years he ruled the people with justice and goodness. He smote all the tribes of the enemy, the Obamaites and the Clintonians, the Wokeites, the fake scribes, and the rhinos, and the spies of the deep state. He brought great prosperity throughout the land as he freed his people from burdensome taxes and onerous rules. But in the 4th year of his reign, God sent forth a great plague to test the people, and the people were sore afraid. They listened not to the voice of their leader, and fell among themselves with protest and rioting, even if it was mostly peaceful. In the affray, the Democrats seized their chance to destroy the prophet, led by the ancient Joseph, a priest from the family of Biden, who at 935 years old was a cousin of Methuselah. The Bidenites stole the battle from the Trumpites with much chicanery and cheating, and then, having wickedly deposed him, they set about to crush Donald. They tore into him with false claims and calamities and writs against him. But the Trumpite was courageous and yielded not to their persecutions. And so it happened that, before long, Biden had grown so old that his priests could no longer even keep his eyes open to sign orders. So the tribe of the Democrats brought forth another woman, this one called Kamala, and they said, "You're out, Joe. This is the anointed one to continue our work." But Kamala was weak-minded and had a laugh like a donkey that grievously alarmed the people. And so, in a final battle, the Trumpites again prevailed, smiting Kamala. Now Donald ruled with ever greater strength and virtue. He closed the border to the illegal aliens, banished wrongdoers from the land, ended crime, punished foreign enemies with taxes on their oxen and wines, drove out the usurers from the central bank, and made the country great again, though there was still ungrateful complaining from the scribes and the Pharisees about affordability and the Constitution. And so, having brought peace and prosperity to the chosen people, Donald decreed that the whole world would be brought to the same place. He slew evil rulers from west to east. Yet, even as he pulled down the wicked from their thrones, he was also a peacemaker who ended 8 wars. Though the sanctimonious, arrogant judges of Nobel, of the frozen north, refused to recognize his greatness and gave their stupid prize to someone else. At last, with the sons of Israel, he turned his might on the Persians, the enemy who had caused great suffering, and he smote them in their own homes. When they closed the great waterway between their land and the land of the Ishmaelites, the Trumpites stood athwart the strait and ordered the waters to open, and lo, they were opened. There was much rejoicing, and the oil was able to flow once more, and prices returned almost to where they had been before the strait was closed. Not all believed in the greatness of the man, and some sought to sow doubts among the people. The leader of the Romans, a man named Leo, who was weak on crime and probably an Obamaite, understood not the truth nor any of the meanings of God's words, and he spoke many calamities against him. That is why I, J.D., am here to bear witness and explain it, so that all, yes, even the Romans, will come to acknowledge the truth. From the editorial page, Minnesota's Mining Liberation Act. The GOP overturns a Biden rule that banned resource development. Congress can't seem to get its act together to pass major permitting reforms. But the good news is that Republicans are flexing their power under the Congressional Review Act, CRA, to rescind damaging Biden-era rules. Last Thursday, the Senate voted 50 to 49 to reverse restrictions on critical mineral mining in Minnesota's Iron Range. The CRA allows Congress to reverse regulations with a simple majority vote in both chambers and the president's signature. Resolutions can't be filibustered in the Senate. Congress has used the law to overturn some 24 Biden-era policies. The latest to get the PICS Acts is a Biden public land order that withdrew some 225,500 acres of land in the Superior National Forest in northern Minnesota from mining and other resource development. The House passed the resolution in January, 214 to 208, with a single Democratic vote, Maine's Jared Golden. All GOP senators voted aye except for Maine's Susan Collins and Tom Tillis of North Carolina. It now goes to President Trump's desk, and he is expected to sign it. Expanding domestic critical mineral development ought to be a bipartisan cause as China seeks to weaponize its control of the supply chain. The Duluth complex, beneath Minnesota's Superior National Forest, boasts nearly 8 billion tons of critical minerals, including a large share of America's reserves of nickel, 95%, cobalt, 88%, and copper, 34%. These minerals are required for electric vehicles, grid transmission, and military weapons, among other things. Yet progressives apparently want to keep critical minerals in the ground, as they also do fossil fuels and import them from China and low-income countries with few environmental safeguards. An added political bonus is that because regulations overturned under the CRA can't be reissued, a future Democratic president won't be able to lock up mining in Minnesota again. Now, on to permitting reform. Please. Why I'm becoming a Republican. I first registered as a Democrat in 1959. The party's hostility to Israel is too much. By Alan M. Dershowitz. I am a lifelong Democrat. I started campaigning for the party's local candidates as a teenager in Brooklyn, New York, have been a registered Democrat for 67 years, made speeches for John F. Kennedy as a college student, and can count on one hand the number of Republicans I've ever supported for any office. I still disagree strongly with the GOP on abortion, the separation of church and state, immigration, health care, and taxes, among other things. Yet I've decided to bite the bullet and register as a Republican. The Democratic Party has become the most anti-Israel party in U.S. history. Last week, all but 7 Senate Democrats voted for an arms embargo against the Jewish state and an avowed enemy of Israel. Abdul El-Sayed is gaining ground in the Democratic campaign for U.S. Senator from Michigan. There's no denying that the hard left, anti-Israel wing of the Democratic Party has moved from the fringe to the mainstream. Until recently, there was an age gap, with younger voters more strongly opposing Israel. But recent polls suggest that the trend now includes Democrats of all age. Republicans have their own anti-Semitic fringe, but for now it remains a fringe. I believe that the Democratic Party's hostility to Israel represents a deeper and more dangerous shift away from the center and toward a radical approach that is bad for America and the free world. So I intend to work hard to prevent the Democrats from gaining control of the House and Senate, and I urge those who share my concerns about the increasing influence of radicalism in the Democratic Party to vote, campaign, and contribute for the continued Republican control of Congress. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 21st, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.